Yay.
Thank you all for coming out to Cloud First Logging in AWS. This will be very much a AWS-centric conversation. If you have questions on other platforms, I may be able to help afterwards, but hopefully we can stay on topic for AWS-centric stuff. Figure we start off with a basic agenda, go over, pretty much get a baseline from the audience, figure out where people's experiences are, what histories you've run across, and transition from that into CloudWatch, which will be a fundamental product offering that we leverage for our enterprise logging system. After that, we'll tackle Cloud First. What exactly does it mean in our approach to how we tackle this issue? And then transition into additional ways to migrate logs from your environment into CloudWatch so you have more of a unified means to interact with them. Follow that up with laying out an example framework where we can transport CloudWatch logs across accounts and across regions. So if you diversify your workload, you can still bring it all back to a centralized logging account that could have separate access control lists from any other piece of your infrastructure to maintain the pretty much read attributes of all that good stuff. Follow that up with laying out a rough roadmap for also archiving an additional copy off into S3 for any long-term audit needs. So it's a very interactive format as we run through it. If you have questions that are on point for the topic at hand, get your hands up. We'll tackle them as we go, and we can go down some rabbit holes if they're on topic. If they're off, we'll tackle them at the end. Moving forward. So to find a baseline, what sort of logging experience do we have? Much experience with syslog infrastructures? Any log shipper platforms, say rsyslog, syslog-ng, or anything such as Logstash or FileBeats? Okay. We're starting off with almost nothing.
Yes, all of the above.
Syslog.
Okay. Well,
You got one guy to keep you on.
sounds good. He'll call me on my stuff. Ooh, disapproving frown. Okay. So logs are important. They give us pretty much a audit trail that we can use to ascertain all the actions the system took in regards to servicing the needs of a user on our platform. They can help us figure out everything, and we just have to try to make sure we don't get the information we don't want to have in there, but still keep the information we need to make it a useful tool. So there's a long history of how logging has traditionally been done. When you start in a cloud-first approach, you commonly want to shun away from your traditional approaches to how you've done things. So when you move to the cloud, you might not be setting up a syslog server to receive a stream of all of the logs in your server fleet, whose sole job is then to forward it off to some enterprise logging system. There's newer approaches when you move into the cloud, so legacy approaches need to be reevaluated. And also, in the cloud, we have various approaches for provisioning stuff. Are we having much experience with hypervisors, hyper-converged setups? Well, we have some options where if the platform has metadata available for us about the services it's instantiating, we can leverage that into the platform we're instantiating. The cloud is crazy. Throughout the presentation, I will pull out various pro tips. The pro tips hopefully might bring your attention to things that can stall projects or send you to IAM purgatory for long periods of time while you try to work out little issues. And if you guys know of any that I miss, please get your hands up so I can hopefully make this better. So quick intro into CloudWatch. CloudWatch is our most valuable player for logging in AWS platforms because it is their own internal centric service they write to internally. So when their new product team is looking at how do we make logs available, they'll commonly just kick it out onto a CloudWatch stream that is available natively in your account. By default, CloudWatch streams
AWS stands for?
Amazon Web Services, the Amazon virtualization computer components part of their company.
It's an ecosystem.
Oh yes, they have all kinds of products. You could run Hello World in about 15 different ways on their platform. So by default, log groups do not have an expiration. Any logs that get made for you will be retained forever. Those logs cost money to store. So their default is to cost you infinite money. Don't worry though, it's made for your protection because they might be important logs. So pro tip, check expirations. Okay, so, yep, moving on. In the cloud-first approach, we are going to be using Docker for our workloads. We could do traditional, thick, like EC2 virtual machine deployments, but that's a lot thicker than we need, and the management and orchestration gets a lot higher. Why pay for a server administrator when we don't have to? And the proposed platform will also need a MongoDB service. Since I originally came up with the slide deck, AWS has come out with a MongoDB service it could leverage, but originally it was set to use Mongo Atlas, which is a MongoDB provider in the cloud that simplified our deployment. In essence, the rest of the cloud-first approach boils down to infrastructure as code. So you don't have your server administrators out there hand-jamming settings in your various accounts and infrastructure to make your deployment happen. We have a repository. When you commit to that repository, it gets peer-reviewed. So other humans are checking your code. And after it's merged, an automated pipeline picks it up and applies it. So you're not even out there typing the commands. Beyond that, architect and test for resiliency. So pretty much as your team grows and develops, hold yourselves to continually higher standards for ensuring that you meet your no downtime goal. Hold yourself to your goal. Push yourself. Challenge how your systems work and strive to be better. Build on an immutable infrastructure approach. So if something needs changed, you just destroy it and build and run on the new thing. Don't try to make changes to things. Shoot them in the head and drive on. Audit log monitoring and telemetry are fundamental for your informed decision making. Sometimes you'll know you have an error, but maybe not exactly where or what. But if you can quantify what its effects are, you can make more informed decisions about how you triage things. On top of that, encrypt all the things. It's commonly just an option. Find it, make it, try to be better. So, CloudWatch is the fundamental service. How are some examples of how we can get things in? In essence, the best way and easiest way you'll commonly run across if you're coming from a thick or traditional server type infrastructure is a AWS logs daemon declaration in a config, which you guys probably cannot make out. But it boils down to some nice, easy JSON-esque config where it calls out what file is, what you want the stream name to be, what would a regex for your date stamp be for multi-line event breaking, and then it just moves on down to the next section. There's not a ton of options, but it does its job pretty well. In addition, there's a bunch of other ways to ship logs into CloudWatch, such as ECS logs can be configured in the tasks. RDS logs, which would be the relational database service, which is their Postgres or MySQL clusters in the cloud, can be configured to log to CloudWatch also. Directory services, which is them running a Microsoft Active Directory for you in the cloud. Logs can also be redirected to CloudWatch. So CloudWatch is a fundamental component in our approach. But CloudWatch can't transport and catch all of our things. There are still some components within AWS that were built before CloudWatch made its big intro into their infrastructure and took over everything. One example of that would be the logs from the network load balancers that you can use for bringing traffic in to your virtual services. Those simply get generated and dumped into an S3 folder as this little tarball message dump. So one easy solution, if you need to get your proxy logs to know what's going on in all of your microservices broken down with all kinds of useful info, is you get a little Lambda. Anytime an object's put into that folder, your Lambda fires, takes the tarball, extracts the tarball, transforms it, and does a AWS log put to the CloudWatch stream for each and every message. It's a pretty easy approach. This is where you get into some of the cloud fine print. If you do this setup, the bucket must be located in the same region as the load balancer. The Lambda must also be in the same region. You move these out, and it doesn't matter if your IAM policy is perfect, it will still not work. So let's introduce one of our next most important players in our logging infrastructure. And this is going to be Kinesis. Is there anybody in the crowd familiar with a big data product called Kafka? Yeah? So Kinesis is a lot like Kafka, just running in AWS. In essence, you end up with producers who make messages, and those messages are sent to streams. Streams are hosted on shards, and shards have consumers who connect to them and pull messages off of it. With Kinesis, the streams can be used across accounts and across regions. So with this setup, we can have one AWS account subscribe its CloudWatch logs to a destination that's in a different region, in a different account, who just gets a copy of all of their logs in real time, that we don't even have to worry about because it's built into the infrastructure that we're natively running on. There's multiple little bits of fine print. Let's see here. Yeah, Kinesis Stream's only currently available solution for the cross-account subscriptions. Log groups and destinations must be in the same region. However, the destination can point to an AWS resource in a different region. So your source and destination have to be in the same place, but what it subscribes to could be different. Lots of little gotchas, lots of fine print. So for our logging platform, we decided to go with GreyLog. GrayLog is a small little extension that will pretty much give us an Elk-esque stack without so much the Kibana front end.
It's what kind of extension?
It's a user interface to leverage an Elastic cluster. So commonly you'd have an Elk stack, which would be Elasticsearch, Logstash, and Kibana. But this is more a GrayLog stack where GrayLog is replacing the Kibana component and Logstash component of that other stack. So in our cloud-first approach, we're going to run these Docker containers. So ECS is our easily chosen solution for running Docker at scale with all kinds of different features. So with that, we have Elasticsearch running in a service. The MongoDB service that we need is outsourced. And we have Docker containers running in ECS with a load balancer. With that, we configure and set up our services. So the biggest ones we're concerned with configuring in the Docker environment would be our external URI, also the publish URI, which are used internally for building the cluster state within the GrayLog server cluster. If you actually need to terminate TCP connections for TCP-based message ingestion, there's some caveats around hosting in ECS where if you're doing this as infrastructure as code, you can't do it because they only let you forward to one target group. So I got some tricks I can show you if you need it to do that in your launch config. Yeah, that's pro tip area. So after we pick out our URIs and get those set in the Docker environments, we tie that together with the Kinesis inputs that we've worked to make with CloudWatch across all of our various log sources, across all of our different accounts in all the different regions. And we take and configure GrayLog to subscribe to the Kinesis stream, and it receives messages from all the accounts on one input. We can parse, slice, and dice that within our logging system, but as far as the infrastructure is concerned, if it logs, we get it. Let's see here. Yeah, extractors in GrayLog, which is pretty much, hey, I need you to run this regex and make this new field when I get a message that has this kind of thing in it. Those are made per input. So when you're designing your, how am I going to break out my logs, keep that in mind for how you break that out. So Kinesis streams can be thought of as like log groups. So GrayLog versus Elk, why not GrayLog with Elk? When using the Elk stack before, I've commonly found the Elasticsearch management components to be a real nightmare. Having to go in and update the template definitions for new indexes just to be able to get my data to ingest has been more frustrating than I felt with dealing with, and it's really hampered projects before. So that drove me to take a look at GrayLog, which is absolutely fantastic since it takes a index deflector approach for ingestion, where it will pretty much dynamically build the template as it sees the messages. Key tricks: if you have messages that have a format that you extract or build by JSON, have your things be consistent in their field values. Say if you have message timestamp and that's an epoch value, don't all of a sudden have something else that comes out with that field that has like a Julian date. It doesn't go well. You'll have messages not get indexed, and that's about the one downside. You can easily alert on it though, and when you get it, take care of it. Yeah, so by leveraging GreyLog in place of Kibana and the other Logstash front end, we get pretty much the same functionality with a simpler operational overhead, and it kind of has some training wheels for when I pass it off to coworkers to be able to save the day on certain things. So Kinesis is fantastic. It's let us build a cross-account, cross-region system, but if you've spent much of any time administering an Elastic-based document system, you don't want this thing to be the enterprise system of truth, because worrying about the BCPDR requirements will keep you up at night. So the simple approach to that is don't let your Elastic document store of your logs become your enterprise system of truth. It's too much of an overhead you don't feel like paying for. So treat the Elastic store as your convenient tool to view the logs simply, to actually be able to search and find what you need for whatever retention you need. It's not your source of record, though. If you have auditors want to see something, you don't point them to that, because that's not where the source of truth is. With Kinesis, you've already gathered all the logs into a set stream. We can take, and just like the load balancer made a dump of messages in a tarball, we can take and make our own little tarball dumps of the messages from our Kinesis streams and dump them out into our own S3 folder. After we have that, we can go a step further and realize this account attached to our infrastructure, we might not trust it. So if we really want to be paranoid, we can have a totally unrelated account, one we trust, but unrelated, set up for a cross-region, cross-account replication, and receive a replicated copy of everything put in that S3 bucket, so you could have an offsite escrowed copy of your logs if need be. There's multiple ways to address audit requirements without having to build them into your Elastic document data store. So S3 buckets with replication are a simple way you can accommodate a lot of that. And with that, that takes us through building and pointing out a roadmap for enterprise logging in AWS. If there's much of any other questions, I'd be more than happy to entertain them. I ran too fast. Oh, unfortunately, that just means we have more question and answer time. Yes?
How much is this costing you as far as AWS and logging all the things?
So, logging most all of our cost is related to actually running our infrastructure more so than logging all the things. And our AWS cost is directly related to how much we will feel like running. So without getting into more specific details that I'm comfortable with, I'm not sure how to answer your question.
Do you find that running the Lambdas and running the Elastic storage is, you're probably managing that cost as a percentage of your overall income in the company?
Yeah, some of the times when I've looked at it though, it's been like 3 cents for a month of the Lambdas running, so I'm not that concerned with it.
Okay, that's my question.
Yeah. The Lambdas don't really get run that often. About the most common one is, hey, you made a new log group, let's set our default settings. Number one, you expire in 30 days. If we haven't gotten you out of CloudWatch, either we're messing up or something went wrong. Beyond that, there is subscribe to destination. We know what Kinesis streams we have in our environment, so we can influence that log group name creation some, or we can write our case statement to account for the ones that we don't control. And we can look at the log group that just got made, that happened automatically and we don't control it. See that it happened by event, trigger the AWS action, see its type, and subscribe it to the destination automatically. 3 cents a month. Simple, easy. Keeps costs down. It probably saves more than it costs in the course of any month.
The key being that you're expiring these messages after a month, not keeping them around like a pet forever.
Oh yeah, because by default you get infinite storage. It costs more than S3, but they'll let you do it forever.
Having overrun a Amazon budget doing that.
Oh.
So, yeah, this is why I'm asking these questions. Come back at the end of the month and go, that's got more zeros than I was expecting.
Yeah. S3 object versioning can also come out to be somewhat of a pain at times, especially if you change something a lot. Beyond that, EC2 instance runtime is probably the largest use of the bill, or using inappropriately sized resources in like RDS clusters. That can definitely make a huge chunk in short order. Oh.
I don't want to take up all the question time.
Oh, well, we got plenty of question time.
Okay. You're talking about using Kinesis and publish and subscribe. In my head, I'm thinking about MQTT and Mosquito. Is this a similar thing?
You can kind of think of it kind of the same. So the Kinesis thing is kind of a message queue, message producer, message consumer kind of system. So it can queue messages for, I believe mine are configured about 3 days most of the time. If I can't get messages off by the end of 3 days, I might start dropping messages. So there's this incident response timer built in.
Okay.
But that's our play in its usage in our environment. It aggregates and ships the logs. So
does it send you a out-of-band notification if the messages haven't been picked up?
It can easily be configured for logging to and alerting to meet whatever operational whim or desire you may have. Pretty much just find the failure scenario that you'd like in CloudWatch metrics and write an alarm for it, and you can get an email alert as soon as that condition occurs. There is even options for doing predictive forecasting with seasonality with some of the metrics in the CloudWatch metrics product.
Do you include any kind of encryption for long-term storage, or you just kind of relying on RAM rules to make sure that you're able to see what you're able to see, that you're able to?
So, commonly leverage the KMS encryption functionality whenever interacting with the S3 products. So, it's S3 but encrypted before anything's written to it. So there's a separate encryption key beyond just access to it.
You don't work for AWS, do you?
No. Nope, had never used any one of their products before I got this gig to build out a cloud-based logging infrastructure. And I've done cloud build-outs, commonly doing private on-prem cloud or on-prem hyper-converged madness. But this was my first time doing it in the cloud, and AWS has lots of gotchas, and there was a lot of pulled hair over the course of a year working it out, and I figured I'd put something together and hopefully it can make some less hair get pulled out over time. Yeah.
Are there charges, network charges for, you said you could have Kinesis sending to another region, so are you paying cross-region prices for that?
Oh, so the Kinesis pricing is kind of crazy. I think that is one of the actual cheap ways / they eat it internally, cross-region data transit. I may be wrong though. Now granted, Kinesis is not cheap by itself, so it's not like you can do a data exchange arbitrage with that.
And my other question was with GrayLog, have you run into any resource constraints with it doing all of the, it seems like it's doing all of the processing of the logs for you, and then you're saving those off to S3 buckets for long-term storage. So I don't know how much data the application processes, but I know that with Elasticsearch sometimes you need multiple worker nodes to be able to handle all of like the indexing and all of that. So I don't know what how GrayLog is set up.
So currently I run on a ASG cluster that's defined in CloudFormation that hosts a ECS cluster, and I run my tasks with AWS VPC mode. So my tasks come up with their own IP address separate from the host. So I can have multiple things at port 9000, and they actually come up at port 9000, which makes cluster discovery so much simpler. Yeah, when you get random ethereal ports and it just tries to connect by the port 9000 you have hard-coded, you're in for a bad day.
So your GrayLog server is auto-scaling as well? Is that what you're saying? Did I miss that part?
It's in an auto-scaling group. We currently have that fixed at a size of 3 for the ECS cluster that hosts the compute environment for the Docker tasks. We have 2 families of ECS tasks. We have a GrayLog master because they have a concept of a master worker and then a regular worker. So we spin one up with the master flag, and then the other ones get spun up without that flag set. But other than that, they're the exact same image. We do a slightly modified custom entry point file with some AWS CLI action to register with the network load balancer. So if you need to do TLS-based TCP connections, you can still do that. You just have to do your own load balancer registration. And after that, they're whatever size we put the constraints on the Docker image. So 4 hosts running with 8 gigs of RAM with the Java heap value set at 4 gigs. It chews through messages right and left, and we don't really hold any bit of a backlog in the Kinesis streams, so our message throughput limit is looking good since we're keeping up. So we don't have to scale yet, which will be a manual conversation at this point. But since we don't need to, we don't need to.
I've run GrayLog internally for years. It's a fabulous logging platform. It's fast as hell. It's just Elasticsearch is amazing. So never done any cloud stuff with it.
Oh.
That's it being a great project.
It helped solve a big data ingestion issue I ran
You can throw
across.
as much at it as you've got cores and memory. It's just it'll eat up.
And the user interface and a lot of their like user story design sequences, they based a lot of their design on makes intuitive sense.
Yeah, yeah, and I can go out and grab a Sophos filter, or whatever crazy vendor.
Oh yeah, it uses the, what's that, the
Templates.
Grok message parsing
Yeah.
filter library. So if you've spent much time with Logstash, or you might have run across it, but it is a tad bit easier than having to deal with regex. It can be tighter, simpler,
Yeah,
more
it'll kind of
complex.
autofill your word you're trying to come up with. It's pretty intuitive for searching. Yeah, it'll help you learn it as you go. And it's free. I mean, come on,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah. This whole enterprise system, beyond the AWS charges, you're paying nothing for software.
Zero. Yep. Good talk.
Thank you.